On the left is Chuck Todd. He's a journalist, and each week he hosts a political discourse show called Meet the Press. On the show that week, this is many years ago, was Rudy Giuliani, an attorney representing the former president of the United States. And during the interview, which caused Chuck to hold his head, he said, "Truth isn't truth." Well, Rudy, you may have been right, but not for the reason you thought. So let's take a look at that. Hi, my name is Jeff Goldfinger. Welcome to the 4th episode of the STEM Signal, where we help the STEM educated increase their career signal above the workplace noise. Now let's get down to business. So today we're going to be talking about words that work. This is the title of a book by Frank Luntz. It's not what you say, it's what people hear that counts. He's a political strategist, but this is not about politics. I'm going to use a story from politics to get the point across. So in 2001, the Republicans, led by George H.W. Bush, took over both the White House and both seats of Congress. They had, and this is in the U.S., by the way, and they had an agenda item to get rid of the estate tax. At the time, they felt that the estate tax was a double burden, right? They were taxed when they earned it, and now they're being taxed when they die. Now, if you didn't buy that argument, their other argument was, well, the estate tax hasn't been raised since the mid-'80s. At the time that they argued this, the estate tax was at $650,000. That's the floor at which the federal level would kick in. So what I want you to think about now is when you hear the term estate tax, what are you picturing in your mind? Go ahead and put it in the comments before I reveal. So what is the picture of an estate that you have in mind? Is it something that looks like the Wayne Manor from Batman? This, by the way, is a real place. It's called the Mentmore Towers in the United Kingdom. The point is that the Democrats at the time were picturing this kind of estate. And they said, well, wait a second, we don't own estates like this. So why do we care, you Republicans, if you want to do something? We're not going to cooperate with you on a bipartisan bill. So Frank Luntz and his associates held a focus group where they brought people together and they tried out different language. And what they discovered was by changing one word, they could move the Democrats into bipartisan support for the bill. And that one word, you probably know it already, is death tax. By moving estate tax to death tax, they produced a bill that changed it from $650,000 to $5.5 million. That's a 9x return on investment by changing one word. And that's the point of this episode. In order to increase your STEM signal, I want you to realize that every word matters in the workplace. All right, so if we're going to talk about words, let's take a step back and look at the study of language from a philosophical point of view. So back in the mid-1900s, British philosopher J.L. Austin first explored this notion of speech act theory. It was picked up by Berkeley American philosopher John Searle, and the two of them worked on what we now know as speech act theory, which describes words that not only convey information, but they perform an action as well. So for those of you who are STEM educated and remember your periodic table of the elements, Dr. Fernando Flores picked up on the studies that Austin and Searle were doing. He came up with his own notion of a periodic table for 6 very specific speech acts in his periodic table of language. You can read about his work in Conversations for Action and Collected Essays. The first of his speech act that he felt is essential to workplace environments is an assertion. An assertion is something that's objectively true or false. So what do we mean by that? Let's have an example. Let's say you want to buy a car and you walk into the car dealership and you meet the salesperson, and let's say fuel efficiency is important to you. And so the car salesperson says, well, this particular car gets 5.9 liters per 100 kilometers on the highway, 48 miles to the gallon on the highway. Now, we all have an agreement on what a mile is, what a gallon is, and how to test that. So now we only need to do is go find out if he's being truthful or not. And for that, we can use any independent third party who has no bone to pick with this assertion. If it comes back that it really does get 48 miles to the gallon, then we claim that this gentleman is sincere. Well, what if it doesn't come back truthful? Then we say, you know what? He's a jerk.
I was born a poor black child.
Okay, not that jerk. This kind of jerk. The guy who has no care for what is truthful. He actually will lie to you. You know, he's telling you in this case, ignore the sticker. It really gets 60 miles to the gallon, which we both know is not true. Okay. So the liar is a jerk. He's jerking us around by telling us a blatant lie. Now, we might not know it's a lie at the time, but it's usually pretty easy to filter out. Okay, but that's not the real danger in assertions. The real danger comes from this gentleman. By the way, I don't know who this gentleman is in real life. I'm just using these stock photos. You know why. So this gentleman has no care for the truth. He just says whatever he thinks you want to hear. So he'll tell you what you want to hear in order to get the sale. For that, we call him the bullshitter. And this is not my words. This comes from Dr. Harry Frankfurt. He's a professor emeritus at Princeton University, and he wrote a treatise, an academic view of what it means to bullshit. This book spent over 20 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. So obviously people are interested in the topic. So in his own words, the bullshitter is neither on the side of the true or the side of the false. His eye is not on the facts at all. He does not reject the authority of the truth as the liar does and oppose himself to it. He pays no attention to it all. By virtue of this, bullshit is a greater enemy of the truth than lies are, because it's much harder to ferret out. And this is the kind of thing that you can notice in meetings amongst your colleagues, your peers, superiors. When are they just spouting bullshit versus being sincere with you and stating assertions of fact? Or in the case of George Costanza, just remember, it's not a lie if you believe it. All right, so was I being truthful? Was I claiming something is factual about Rudy Giuliani? So I'm going to go ahead and let him tell you in his own words.
Truth isn't truth.
So I was being sincere with you by telling you what he said. You can do a quick YouTube search and find the full interview. It's rather interesting. So the point is, how can we tell what's true? If somebody tells us something, how do we know he's being sincere or she, sincere, a liar, or a bullshit? So the thing to note from a philosophical perspective is we have to recognize that some truths are no longer true. For example, for millennia, it was true that the Earth is at the center of our solar system. For centuries, it was true that bloodletting, it was an acceptable medical treatment. And for a long time, we all thought that there was only one galaxy, the Milky Way, until within a few years in the 1920s, Edwin Hubble proved to us that we are in an infinite sea of galaxies in this wide, expansive universe of ours. So Rudy was correct in a way, but perhaps not the way he meant it. So let's figure out what are the characteristics of an assertion, a truthful assertion. Well, first, there has to be universal acceptance of the meaning of the words. So, as I mentioned earlier, we know what a gallon is, what a liter is, what a kilometer, what a mile is. We have an agreement about how to test that. So that's universal acceptance of the meaning of the words. Then there's near universal societal agreement as of the factual nature of the assertion. We still have a few flat earthers out there. I'm not trying to disparage them. I make no judgment. That's for others to judge. But what I'll tell you is that's what I mean by near universal societal agreement as a fact. So there's near universal agreement that the earth is round. Okay. And once we have that agreement, then it can be independently verified by a disinterested third party. So in the case of the miles per gallon, you can have your neighbor tested on your car. As long as we're in the car metaphor, let's go ahead and switch gears. This is a spoiler alert. I'm about to show you a clip from Ted Lasso where Nate the Great gives the pregame pep talk. This is to a team that had been losing many games in a row, and so they were trying to change the psyche of the team to go out and win one. So Nate is one of the assistant coaches, and you'll hear his story now.
I've noticed of late that you've been playing like a big dumb pussy. You're more concerned about looking tough than actually being tough. There's a way to be intimidating without being physical. I hope you don't mind me saying. Sam.
Oh, no.
You're constantly getting beat on the wings. It's because you're indecisive. You second guess more than a psychic. The only African I know more imprisoned by their own thoughts is goddamn Nelson Mandela. Rojas.
Ooh, roast me, amigo.
Right, you say that football is life, right?
Football is life.
Yeah, well then your defence is death. Oh. The only person I've seen lose a man more often is Carrie Bradshaw.
Sex and the City.
Yeah.
Tough but fair.
Right, Roy. The great Roy Kent. You're old now. And slow. And your focus drifts. But your speed and your smarts were never what made you who you are. It's your anger. That's your superpower. That's what made you one of the best midfielders in the history of this league. But I haven't seen it on the pitch at all this season.
So Nate used a lot of words like tough, intimidating, indecisive, old, slow. Your focus drifts, Roy. You were the best in the league. Well, those are not assertions of fact. We don't have a universal definition for old, or thankfully, old or slow or best in the league. What does best in the league mean? Is it best by the number of goals, how many games you played in a row? So the point is, these aren't assertions. These are called assessments, or in Nate's case, opinions, right? So Nate is making an analysis, a judgment, an opinion. We're going to use the word assessment as our universal word for all of those. Opinion, a judgment, an analysis, okay? All right, so what are the characteristics of an assessment? Well, the first thing I mentioned is they're neither true nor false. Because we don't have a universal definition, we can't say yay or nay. We can only say good or bad. What we can say is whether or not it's grounded or ungrounded. For example, Nate was noticing the play on the pitch from all of his teammates, and he was given examples of it. So he was providing plenty of grounding, and typically, by the way, you ground your assessments using facts that are assertions. That's why these two acts go hand in hand. Now, Nate's purpose was to notice the past to predict the future. He was basically saying, look, guys, if you still operate like that today, you're going to lose again. He was making his assessments for a helpful purpose. That's the point. You make your opinion. You are judgmental, but for a helpful purpose. We'll talk about when it's unhelpful in a moment. So the last thing to notice is that assessments are always domain specific. So the assessments he was making of Roy being old, right? Roy is not old like this five head. It used to be a forehead, but he's old for a footballer, not old for an educator, for example. So in the first episode, I mentioned that I was a naval officer. So if you were to ask some of my Navy colleagues if I was a reliable naval officer, they'd say, sure, he's fine in the airplane. He was always on time for every mission. He gave reports, his debriefs, all of that, no problem. If you were to ask my daughters if I was a reliable father, they'd probably say no. Because I was out to sea a lot on the aircraft carrier, I missed a lot of their formative years. And so their view, their domain-specific view, is that I was unreliable. So whenever you make assessments of somebody, you want to make sure that you understand the domain of action that you're talking about. One of the things to be very, very careful about is that you don't want to get caught opining for the sake of opining. That's the most dangerous part of an assessment. Remember, I said earlier that assessments you want to be helpful with your assessment. You don't want to just give assessments because you want to hear yourself talk or you have something to say about somebody. That's one of the dangers that you should be able to, not only for yourself, but be on the lookout for that in meetings when people are opining for the sake of opining and it's not for a helpful purpose. The second thing to be on the lookout for is sometimes it can sound factual. For example, I bet if you were to talk to my daughters, they would say, oh, daddy's definitely unreliable, right? So they can make it sound like it's a fact about who I am when it's merely their assessment and it's only an opinion and it's domain specific. So don't get caught up in, again, for yourself, but be on the lookout for those in a room who state opinions, but with such veracity, they're trying to make you believe it's a fact. And then lastly is announce speculations. If you don't have something that's based on grounding, good grounding, a lot of assertions of fact, then it's an ungrounded assessment, and just be transparent about that. Okay, so you can say things like, well, Jeff was a reliable naval officer, but I don't have any grounding to say he would be good tax attorney, right? I don't know one way or another. I haven't kept on whether he went to school for that. So that's my speculation that if he was a reliable naval officer, then he might be a reliable tax attorney, assuming he did all the things to do that well. Okay, so that would be a ungrounded speculation. All right, so I've finished this part one. We're going to continue. As a review, let's talk about assertions and assessments. Again, assertions are objectively true or false, and the speaker is either sincere, a jerk, or a bullshit. As opposed to assessments, which are merely opinions, and instead of being true or false, they're either grounded or ungrounded. They're always said in the context of being helpful. You've noticed the past in order to predict the future for somebody, to make their future better, and it's domain specific. In the next episode, we're going to cover the remaining speech acts in part 2. In the meantime, I have a homework assignment for you. What I'd like you to do is notice assertions and assessments all around you. In meetings, especially when you're on the phone, whether it be a video conference, teleconference, or face-to-face, notice when people are making assertions and assessments. Write them down. Learn to distinguish between the two, especially be on the lookout for assessments that are said with such strength that the speaker is trying to make them sound like assertions. So you can also practice this when watching TV, movies, documentaries. It doesn't have to be nonfiction. You can watch a fictional movie and still pick up on the notion of assessments and assertions. And then the last place is when you're surfing the web. I picked a very neutral site here, Wikipedia, to just help you learn how to distinguish the two in a very quick and easy way. So you'll notice here's some assertions of fact. They claim, and in English, they have over 6.6 million articles. In Dutch, 2.7 million. Those are assertions of fact that, in theory, any third party can independently verify because we have universal agreement on what an article is, what the English language is, and how to count them. In the lower left-hand corner of this web screen, you'll see it says Wikipedia is hosted by the Wikimedia Foundation. Well, what does hosted mean? Is hosting merely the web server? Is it providing intellectual support? Is it providing financial capital? What does hosting mean? We don't have a universal definition for that. So in this case, that would be an assessment. We can assess that Wikimedia is hosting Wikipedia in some way, and it would be good to know the grounding for what their definition of hosted is. So the bottom line is this is everywhere. Practice noticing these two distinctions. All right, so as I mentioned in the past, this is a new channel. Please like and subscribe. Although if you really want to increase your STEM signal, it's much better if you refer this to other people by copying the link and sending them or letting them know about the channel. Word of mouth is much more powerful than just letting the algorithm do it. I didn't learn the stuff I'm passing to you from algorithms. I work with mentors. Look upon me as one of your mentors, if you will. Please share this with others. Bottom line is, all right, thank you for watching the STEM Signal. This is Jeff Goldfinger, and until next week, keep your STEM signal above the noise.